vaccine ya. Coronavirus not something we do. It not sabi race, it not sabi gender, it not sabi tribe. It don't kill thousands of Africans around the world because it not been get cure. But the good news now, it don't get vaccine. Coronavirus not all man in business. So tell you people that way you like. On a member say, we all not safe till we all learn safe.
The Right Honorable Majority Leader of the National Assembly, the Right Honorable Minority Leader of the National Assembly, Honorable Samba Jallow, Deputy High Commissioner of the British High Commission in the Gambia, our friend, our brother, our colleague, always ready to respond to the National Assembly whenever the legislature knock on his doors, no other person but Gambia's celebrated historian, Mr. Hassum Sise. The Right Honorable Member for the Serekunda constituency, who is not only a National Assembly member, but he is also a prominent rights advocate, an educator, a sociologist, academic, researcher, philosopher, and above all, the man of the people, Honorable Halifa Sallah. Last and not the least, I wish to recognize my own boss, Gambia's veteran of parliamentary administration, clocking 3 decades into administering legislature and legislative processes. A smart strategist, a team player, a visionary. He is no other person than Momodu A. Sisi, Clerk of the National Assembly. Ladies and gentlemen, it is our pleasure to call you to the precincts of the National Assembly for the first time in the annals of our history, to interact, to engage, to share. The objective is to ensure that the citizens, the stakeholders in our governance, are aware of what the legislature is doing for and on their behalf. It also gives the legislature the opportunity to hear directly what the concerns, what the wishes, what the aspirations are. So we are privileged to be part of those writing history in this maiden edition of the National Assembly Open Day. And can we put our hands together for the Westminster Foundation for Democracy for standing by the National Assembly in ensuring that we are accountable, we are transparent, we are visible to the electorates. The Westminster Foundation are the supporters behind today's event. Mr. Jabate and team, thank you. Without much ado, I wish to start the ball rolling, and there is no better way to start the ball rolling than to allow the very man himself to welcome you to his house. He is no other person than the Clerk of the National Assembly. Mr. Sise, you are welcome.
Honorable Majority Leader of the House, Honorable Keke Bojang, Honorable Halifa Sallah, Member for Serekunda, Honorable Members of the National Assembly, Your Excellency, the British High Commissioner to the Gambia, Representative of the Westminster Foundation for Democracy, Deputy Clerks, Directors of the National Assembly, invited speakers, distinguished invited guests, officials of government who are here in present, students, school children from various schools selected, members of the press, all protocols respectfully observed. Good morning to you all. I am deeply delighted as Clerk of the National Assembly to welcome you all to this maiden edition of the National Assembly Open Day. Today is symbolic and significant in that for the first time in the annals of our history, the National Assembly has taken some concrete steps to bring the legislature closer to the people. Honorable distinguished invited guests, today's event comes to the hilt of robust reforms in the National Assembly service. Instituted by the administration, reforms which do not only enhance effective service delivery, but also offer some technical advices and guidance to the legislature. It is the result of these collective efforts that culminated into the passing of the National Assembly Service Act 2021, which guarantees financial and operational independence to this very important organ of the state. It is obvious that parliaments are fundamental institutions of democratic governance. Effective parliament contributes to the rule of law, economic prosperity, and improved social welfare of this country. It is in this recognition of the reality and aware of the needs to support the National Assembly of the Gambia in its commitment toward providing the best parliamentary service to its citizens that we partner with Westminster Foundation to organize this important convergence today. Distinguished guests, the National Assembly Open Day therefore demonstrates the commitment of the legislature in bringing a more open and accessible institution to the public. It also further denotes an improvement in our service delivery by the National Assembly Service and to the promotion of citizens' engagement. We are aware that for many ordinary citizens and residents of this country, the National Assembly and politics are abstract notions that many only considered briefly during election period. Not many people care much for what is going on in this assembly, even though many life-changing laws and initiatives were made here. We sincerely hope that after today's events, you will know more about the legislature and how it evolves over the past years. The leaders who guided our nation before, during and after independence. And we also hope that you will gain basic knowledge about the National Assembly operations and the core principles it stands for during the various presentations that are to follow. On that note, I once again welcome you all to this important event, and thank you very much for coming. Thank you.
Much the Clerk of the National Assembly, and I have not been disappointed. I have announced him as a veteran of parliamentary administration, and I think those short, sharp remarks did prove me true. What I will now do is to turn to our partners, those who have been working with us in the trenches, ensuring that this legislature fulfills its mandates, no matter how hard, no matter how sweet it is. And those are no other person than the Westminster Foundation for Democracy. And I have the pleasure to invite the country director, Mr. Madi Jobade, to make a statement.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Jani. And let me say all protocols respectfully observed. It's very refreshing indeed. And I'm really glad to share these few remarks. To say WFD has been in the Gambia since 2017 and invited by the British High Commission and provided the first induction training for the elected National Assembly members in 2017. And by 2018, it opened offices in the Gambia, mainly located in the National Assembly, to support the National Assembly in the democratization process of the Gambia. Now, WFD itself is a UK public independent body that is supporting democracy, strengthening democracy around the world. And Gambia is one of its newest offices. Since 2018 to the moment, we've been basically working inside the National Assembly, not with the members, but primarily with the Office of the Clerk, helping to build capacity of the staffs, the institutions, the structures inside the National Assembly. And so this event today forms part of that process, which is has objectives, one of which, as the Honorable Clerk highlighted, to bring the National Assembly to the people and the people to the National Assembly. After all, the National Assembly is the people's house. National Assembly members are the people's representatives. And so there can be democracy, good governance without an effective, strong National Assembly, and particularly one that is in tune with the people, not just at election time, but all the time. Members of the public require to know what is the National Assembly, what is its role, what is its position, and so also to follow in the processes in the decisions that are going to come out of the National Assembly, which are far-reaching on the lives of the citizens. So essentially, for WFD, this is an event to further strengthen Gambian democracy. It's an event, an accountability event, where National Assembly render account to the members of the public, but also to an awareness creation event where members of the public get to know really what is the National Assembly. So I'm so glad that they have brought in the Gambia's premier historian, Mr. Hassan Sise, to talk about the history of the National Assembly. And certainly in terms of the role, the significance, I'm glad that we have Honorable Halifa Saleh, well knowledgeable to share with us the values, the history, the issues surrounding the National Assembly from a historical, from a political, legal perspective. So on behalf of WFD, for me, just to express our thanks and appreciation to the Office of the Clerk, I must say, for the past 2 to 3 years that we've been here, we've received immense cooperation and collaboration from the Office of the Clerk and all members of staff, to the point that I feel myself as a member of staff of this noble institution. So I want to express that appreciation to the Clerk, and certainly to the Speaker, to all members of National Assembly for the warm welcome that the Westminster Foundation for Democracy receives, continue to receive in this House. So on that note, I look forward to very interesting conversations, and surely I hope to get well informed as an expectation out of this event. Thank you so much.
Good morning, everyone. Honourables, National Assembly members, staff, representatives from the Westminster Foundation for Democracy, invited role in ensuring checks and balances are present for government to fulfil its obligations. As representatives of the people, the National Assembly should not be out of reach. Elected members should be able to regularly dock in with the constituents they represent and the general public at large on issues they work on in this Assembly. This Open Day, which is intended to be an annual event at the beginning of every legislative year to showcase the work and contributions of the Assembly, thank you, could not have come at a better time. The Gambia's democracy is evolving at pace, and is important for stakeholders, including central and local government, development partners, media, civil society, private sector, and most importantly, Gambians, to understand the functions of the National Assembly. This will increase their levels of engagement with the Assembly for the greater good of this country. I would like to use this opportunity to congratulate the Communications Unit under the Office of the Clerk for organising this Open Day. The British High Commission looks forward to continue working with the National Assembly and all of the stakeholders to strengthen the institutions and help consolidate all the positive and progressive gains registered in the Gambia so far. Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yep. What I will now do is to allow the very head of the institution. I'm sure some of you will be wondering, where is the speaker? Because the speaker is supposed to give a statement. But this is the National Assembly, charged with responsibilities that are sometimes way over our soldiers. And the Right Honorable Speaker, very much delighted to be associated with this day, supported this process all throughout to ensure that everything works according to plan, and provided even the very tips and tricks to ensure that the general public is excited about today whenever they are in the National Assembly. Unfortunately, duty calls, unforeseen circumstances made her unavoidably absent. But we have the Right Honorable Majority Leader who steps in her shoe perfectly and very well. And today it gives us great pleasure to invite the Honorable Majority Leader to deliver a statement on behalf of the Right Honorable Speaker of the National Assembly, Mariam Jack Denton, who is unavoidably absent. Honorable.
Thank you very much, moderator. On behalf of the Speaker of the National Assembly, I want to take this opportunity to welcome all our invited guests to this maiden occasion at the National Assembly, which is making history, and the legacy is going to continue. And we want to thank the WFD for this initiative, and I am sure it was borrowed from the civil society organization, the consortium of NGOs, which organized NGO Week in 2012 to showcase the work of the civil society organizations in this country. And Madi and myself were part of that process, and he had extended that to the National Assembly, which is the House of Legislature and also the representatives who are working towards ensuring that good governance exists in this country. And this is an opportunity for all of us as citizens of this country, as representatives of the people, to have our doyen and also other representatives of the National Assembly to be here. So this is a great opportunity for us. Honorable Speaker, on behalf of the Honorable Speaker, Your Excellency, the British High Commissioner, representative of the British High Commissioner to the Republic of the Gambia, honorable members of the National Assembly, honorable minority leader, honorable members and representatives of the Westminster Foundation for Democracy, clerk and staff of the National Assembly, our distinguished speakers, distinguished invited guests, students, the press, and all protocols respectively and duly observed. Good morning, distinguished participants and invited guests. It is my honor and privilege to preside over the National Assembly Open Day in the annals of our history. I am indeed grateful that our stakeholders have responded to our call to grace this important occasion with us. As Speaker of the 5th Legislature, my goal has always been to ensure continuing prospect for the National Assembly by acting fairly and in the interest of all Gambians. Honorable distinguished guests, it has been a great honor building on the work of previous honorable members to have held in this high office, all of whom have contributed to parliamentary democracy through their stewardship and also to the House. I remain committed to providing all members with the opportunity to be heard on behalf of their representatives, constituencies, and also ensure members' contributions in the House are of high possible standard. Distinguished invited guests, ladies and gentlemen, this maiden day open day, which I henceforth will be institutionalized to become an annual event, is testimony of our commitment to effective citizen engagement, whereby citizens are actively involved where they live, including the remote and isolated areas, on their terms, and of course on issues which are the most of concern to them and in the language that makes sense to them. The goal of this day is to bring the National Assembly to the people and vice versa, hence create the necessary connection and build strong relationships with partners and stakeholders. It is intended that the making of this day will serve to raise favorable public perception and also enhance public participation and involvement in the work of legislature. With greater public participation and involvement, the work and role of the National Assembly and National Assembly members will be better understood and appreciated, hence overcome some of the challenges faced by legislature, thereby facilitating their roles in representation, law, and decision-making, oversight, and accountability. Distinguished invited guests, ladies and gentlemen, I therefore wish to commend the leadership of the National Assembly for such an initiative and the Westminster Foundation for Democracy to support our approach to further engagements with the people. The National Assembly Open Day presents an opportunity for the people of the Gambia to know more about their legislature, how it has evolved, the leaders who guided our country before, during, and after independence, and develop their own conceptions and interpretations of parliamentary democracy and its principles. Most importantly, they will also work how they can engage with their expected representatives and meaningfully contribute to democratic processes. The fifth legislature, of course, in the last 5 years done a great deal of improve its reach and accessibility through the internet, public education, outreach activities. We all know, however, that too often, here like everywhere, citizens who are engaged with the legislature remain a small group, not always representative of society as a whole, and likely to be older, more educated in a higher socio-economic group and male. Therefore remains a large group of citizens whose parliaments all around the world was not talked to and who are not aware of how parliament works and how it relates to their daily lives. We took this opportunity to bring this dynamic in order to leave no one behind. The ultimate objective of the Agenda 2030 and the Sustainable Development Goals. I am optimistic that the people will take advantage of the open day to engage the services, staff, and learn the appropriate important places of the National Assembly in the Gambia and how it influences and impacts the life of everyone. I wish all of you a successful event. I thank you all for your presence.
Thank you very much, Honorable Majority Leader. Can we give him another round of applause? I think we are fortunate to be part of those writing the history today. We call it an open day for a reason. We want our stakeholders, are you from the civil society? Are you an ordinary citizen? Are you from the central government? Are you from the local government? Are you a development partner? We want to dialogue. We want what were the trials? What were the tribulations? Where was the legislature before here? Why did it live where it was? Why are we seated at the entrance of Banjo? We have no better person to answer these questions than our very veteran, history veteran. He is no other than the executive director of the National Center for Arts and Culture, and a very good friend to the National Assembly. It is with great pleasure that I invite Mr. Hassan Sise to take us through the history and politics of representation in the Gambia.
Honorable members of the National Assembly here present, the clerk of the National Assembly, the deputy clerks, director, table office, country representative of the WFD, senior staff of the National Assembly, invited guests, ladies and gentlemen. I feel honored to be invited to give this statement on the history of the Gambian legislature. I wish to begin by saying that the Gambia has, as we speak, a rich legislative history of exactly 180 years, because it was in 1843 that the first legislative body, called the Gambia Legislative Council, was created, comprising the governor at Government House, the chief judge, and justice of the peace, JP. Few years later, the collector of customs, the colonial surgeon, now we call them director of medical services, and the colonial engineer were added to the Legislative Council. You can see that the members were all British colonial officials, meaning they were men who were civil servants working directly under the British governor in Batos. To add to that, the governor was himself chairman of the council. In 1866, suddenly, the British decided to dissolve the Legislative Council and decided to annex the colony of the Gambia to Sierra Leone. The governor in Batos was downgraded to the position of administrator, and all legislative and executive decisions were taken from Freetown and then imposed on the Gambia colony. This lack of direct legislative oversight was to cost us dearly, because a few years later, in 1869, when a cholera epidemic hit the Gambia and wiped out 55% of the population of Batos and Georgetown, simply because the administrator, Colonel Darcy, said that he will not spend money to save lives as long as the Legislative Council in faraway Freetown, 13 days by boat, did not give him the spending power. In 1887, this foolish arrangement was ended and rescinded, and the Gambia Legislative Council was brought back and enlarged to 9 members, 5 officials, and 4 unofficials, according to the legislative historian and my former boss, Brahma K. Sanyang. Of the 4 unofficials, meaning those members who did not work in government, 2 were Africans, Mr. James Top, TOPP, and Mr. Samuel Foster. These were the first Gambian legislators. Both were Christian. In 1922, the Muslim elders of Batos made a deputation to the governor that there should be a Muslim representative in the Legislative Council. So you can see that as far back as 100 years ago, Gambians were asking for diversity in the law-making institution. Governor Cameroon accepted, and Alhaji Osman Jeng, an educated trader, was nominated by the governor to become the first Muslim legislator. His boss was Mr. Sam Jones, a wealthy Anglican trader, but Mr. Jones was good enough to always give him leave to do his legislative duties. In 1932, Alhaji Osman ended his 2-year terms and was replaced by Alhaji Sheikh Omar Faye, another trader. In 1947, a new constitution brought to an end 100 years of representation by nomination, because in that year, the constitution introduced the elective element. Edward Francis Small, a strident anti-colonial journalist and trade union leader, became the first elected Gambian to the Legislative Council. In 1951, a new constitution was promulgated which legalized political parties, increased the number of elected members of the Legislative Council to 2. Reverend J.C. Faye and I.M. Gabajompa were elected. In 1954, the elective element in the Legislative Council was increased to 4. And in 1960, universal adult suffrage was introduced, and the Gambian legislature increased to 19 members. Names. From 1843 to 1960, our legislature was called the Legislative Council, or simply Council. From 1960 to 1972, it was called the House of Representatives. From 1972 to 1994, it was called Parliament. Since 1997, it has been called National Assembly. Committees. Due to the small size of the Gambian legislature at the beginning, there were no committees until 1954, when a Budget and Allocations Committee was created and headed by Mr. Henry Madi, the MP for Bakau. Site. The early legislature sat at the Governor's Conference Room at Government House. From 1954 to 1972, our MPs sat at the Batos Club, now the National Museum building. From 1972 to 2014, our legislature sat at the old Parliament House, and in late 2014, it moved to Rekpai Lane with improved facilities. Presidential addresses. The first foreign head of state to address the Gambian legislature was President Leopold Sédar Senghor of Senegal in 1967. The following year, President Mukhtar Uldada of Mauritania did so, and several other presidents have done so in the First and Second Republics. Sessions. Until 1972 elections, sessions for our legislative body was very short. Business was little and far in between. In 1966, for example, the House of Representatives sat for only a total of 11 days. And that is why in those days, our MPs did not get salaries. Clerk, the position of clerk. The position of clerk of the House was established in 1914 when Governor Cameroon nominated his own ADC and private secretary, Captain Watts, as clerk of Legislative Council. Speaker, from 1843 to 1954, the governor combined legislative and executive functions, as he was also president of the Legislative Council. In the 1954 Constitution, the position of Speaker was created, and it was filled by Sir John Mahoney, the first Speaker. From 1962 to 1972, Sir Aliou Jack was Speaker, and again from 1977 to 1983, making him the longest-serving Speaker. Lower House. During the discussions for the 1960 Constitution, there was talk of having a lower house of parliament composed of district chiefs. But the PPP, who were in opposition then, was against this. To strike a compromise, the chiefs were given instead 8 seats in the House of Representatives. From 1947 to 1994, chiefs sat in our legislature to represent the interests of their kind. Prorogue. In its 180 years history, no Gambian legislature has ever been prorogued. Filibuster. In the late 1960s, young MPs like MC Cham of the UP used to try to delay decisions on bills by prolonging the debates, especially the second readings. The opposition was tiny on the ground, and filibuster was used to stall the powerful PPP machine in Parliament. Majority Leader. The first majority leader was Sardauda Kereba Jawara in 1962. Minority Leader. The first minority leader was Honorable P.S. Njai, 1962. Great debates. In the past 200 years, our legislature debated the 1965 Independence Bill, which gave us independence, debated the 1970 Republican Bill, and of course, in 1981, passed the Senegambia Confederation Agreement, among other great moments in the history of this august body. Truncated legislatures. The 1951, 1960, and 1962 legislatures did not complete their 5-year mandate, so they were truncated. Elongated legislatures. The 1954 and the 1966 legislatures had elongated mandates, meaning they served more than 5 years. Absenteeism clause. In 1972, the opposition leader, Honorable P.S. Njai, lost his Banjul North seat as he was absent from Parliament for 3 consecutive sessions without Speaker's permission. This was the first time an elected member of the House lost his post for being absent without Speaker's permission. In the 1980s, the PPP used this a lot of times, for example, to make Buba Balde give way to Omar Sy in Basse. Nominations. The 1965 Constitution empowered the Prime Minister to nominate 3 members to join the elected members of the legislature. In 1968, the PPP government increased this number from 3 to 5. The reason they gave was because they wanted to give women more seats in Parliament. And truly, in November of 1968, Ms. Lucretia St. Clair Diouf, a nurse, became the first woman MP. The other nominated member was from the Chamber of Commerce to represent investment and big business. Finally, Mr. MC, certain things have remained in the legislative history of this country. The qualification for MPs has not changed since 1960s. The nomination clause also remains. The state opening of Parliament, by the Chief Executive has also been a constant, and also the use of English language as the language of Parliament. Thank you very much for your attention.
Hasum, and that was a comprehensive historical dossier. Are you not satisfied with what Hasum just revealed to us? Can we give him a louder round of applause? So for most of us, the young ones, the National Assembly did not start today. I've been hearing since in the 18th centuries. So thank you very much once again, Mr. Hasum, for putting us through. And I think this will be a great lesson for some of our students who are studying governance and government and related subjects. It now gives me the pleasure to invite a young Gambian poet, Mr. Chornogay, to break the ice and entice us as to the power of the word. Mr. Gay, you're welcome.
Good morning, everyone. Members of the high table, of course, students, diplomats, National Assembly members, and everybody present here today. My name is Chernoge, and I'm happy to be here. I think, though, a day like this is something we should have had more often. I would have suggested this is something that every National Assembly member should go back to their constituencies and do, because since you're representing the people, it only makes sense that once in a while you go to them and tell them what it is you're doing and the responsibilities that they entrust with you, how you are discharging those. And then you can discuss on expectations and what you could do more. Because the only reason this house is here is because of representation. And National Assembly members are not appointed, they're elected. You run through the constituency asking for people to vote for you. So when they give you that power, it is your responsibility to return it to them. And the best way you can do that is sit with them and understand, make them understand what role you play. And then they can talk to you about the problems they want you to solve and the things they want you to discuss and the sides they want you to take when debates happen on issues within the National Assembly. So this is something I don't think we should just do here, Uncle Madi. I think this is something that every National Assembly member should do in their constituencies at least once a year for the 5 years that they serve. That said, I'll be reading a poem entitled Contradictions. It's called Contradictions because I believe we have a lot of those in this country currently. And here we go. They have got papers printed for purposes. They have got policies propped up for popularity, principles piled up into portfolios for promotion, propaganda perpetuating prolonged public paralysis, the people pairing up against one another for the promise of prosperity, their pride and prejudices propelling their propensity for conflict. This is a race for personal progress. There is no love lost between you and them. You are pawns in their games, ritual sacrifices to the true gods. They worship power that kills the truth with appropriate lies, power at whatever price, power at the expense of our lives, power that leaves us vulnerable without the strength to fight. Check. We have got homes loaded with love, left to rot. Children to raise in the name of God, we forgot. We teach them obedience without questions like iRobot. So they grow up physically strong but mentally weak. That's a kill shot, a death drop, a blind spot. It must stop. Check. Our people have jobs but cannot feed their families. That's a contradiction. The education system is better, but our people cannot develop this country. That's a contradiction. The hospital is like a slaughterhouse. That's a contradiction. Our role models are criminals in suits and ties. That's a contradiction. The young people are like inexperienced gamblers betting their futures on promises made by men who don't have futures themselves. That's a contradiction. The police officer has been conditioned to accept corruption as a religion and spread the word of that God through bribery. That's a contradiction. The farmer who produces food is starving. That's a contradiction. The vendor woman who sells groceries at the market cannot afford them. That is a major contradiction because we've got a nation to build, a population to teach, a generation to free from the mistakes we have made and the lessons we cannot propagate. This young man is weighed down by your burdens, held down by the pillars put together to lift the few and drown the rest. This young man is hungry for a meal he cannot have because the chef knows better and age is the matter. This young man is a slave kept in chains by the law that puts one man above another. This young man is a walking corpse. killed by a system taught to our people by the children of Shaitan from the gates of hell, a system of people seeming capable to unlearn or change. This young man is a perpetrator of his own tragedy. Because the past has taught us that when kings become killers, that's a battle we cannot win. So our only option is to run and hide and pray to God for a miracle we know won't happen. This young man, that young man, all of you people sitting here today. We don't solve our problems by sitting back and hoping that someone better than us out there is going to do something about them. There is nobody better suited to do something for you than you. So speak for yourself, act for yourself. And when time or circumstances call for it, fight for yourself. Because the phrase is not youth empowerment, it is youth empower. Man, thank you.
You have to speak for yourself. That is my best takeaway. And thank you very much, Mr. Gay, for that inspiring point. The seating is getting long, but that is the purpose. Because at the end of the day today, we want all of you here to be very clear as to what exactly is the National Assembly doing. How is it doing it? Why is it doing it? After all, we've heard so much about the separation of powers, that there are 3 organs in the state. We have heard about the executive. We have heard about the judiciary. This one right here is the National Assembly. How does the National Assembly promote national development? How does the National Assembly assist the entire governance framework of our republic? We have no other person to take us through that conversation than the very veteran of parliamentary work. With over a decade experience in this legislature and over 40 years experience serving the people of the Republic of the Gambia, he is no other person than the Right Honorable Halifa Abubakar Sallah.
That helps. National Assembly members come and go, but the National Assembly service remains. This is why this day is a very important one. Honorable Majority Leader, representing the Honorable Speaker, Honorable National Assembly members, distinguished clerk and clerical staff, esteemed guests from the diplomatic mission and from other institutions, ladies and gentlemen, it is a privilege and an honor to be invited by the Assembly as a guest speaker to deliver what I will prefer to refer to as the first public lecture on a day to be annually commemorated as National Assembly Day. This is both historic and transformative in precept and practice. The theme, the role of the National Assembly in policy, governance, and development processes is overarching and all-embracing. I can affirm without any fear of exaggeration that this post-2016 National Assembly membership has set a pace hitherto unknown in parliamentary democracy in this country that should never be allowed to suffer any setback. If we want to retain an effective, efficient, and impactful, innovative policy advocacy tool and promote a good governance enabling environment characterized by transparency, accountability, probity, thus ensuring development to blossom and thrive. It stands to reason that the office of the clerk, which is the depository of the institutional memory of the Assembly, has specifically chosen to set aside a day as National Assembly Day to assess, locate, apprehend, conserve, and consolidate, expand the remarkable gains so far made. This memorable day is therefore crystallized and cemented to provide the basis for laying the foundation of a cultural edifice or architecture aimed at presenting, consolidating, preserving, and sharing the best normative practices in parliamentary democracy. This enabling environment engenders a fertile ground for parliamentarians, other service providers in the public service and security sectors in particular, and the general citizenry at large to assimilate and acculturate the cherished values connected with, dependent on, and determined by responsible and responsive representation. There is knowledge base in every developmental and institutionalization process. Democratic and responsive representative institutions cannot thrive in ignorance. The office of the clerk must therefore be profusely commended for the timely founding of this institute without walls on parliamentary precepts and practice, aimed at expanding the horizon of the outgoing and incoming members of parliament in particular, and the citizenry at large, on the relevance of the National Assembly to state administration on one hand, and the very lives of the citizenry on the other hand. Holding this event at the eve of the departure of the outgoing National Assembly, the day before the assumption of office of the incoming National Assembly members, as dictated by the Constitution, is strategic and insightful. Honorable members, distinguished guests, the National Assembly service must take note, as all of us must, that Parliament is about people. The struggle of the people everywhere to have a say on how they are to be governed and what to expect from government has created a universal bond in the founding of instruments, institutions, and normative practices that would ensure the realization of their needs and aspirations. There is a push factor and pull factor in the evolutionary process of the democratic dispensation. Power concedes to no one without a demand, the sages say. The demand for government to exist for the people, and not the people to merely exist just to pay taxes without beneficial representation, has led to the growth and development of the power of the people and the acceleration of the democratization process, thus giving the birth to an era of the people, constituted as sovereign citizens in republics all over the globe without distinction to continent. The books of the ages do convey eternal values from these worldwide struggles of the people of the world that exceed the bound of territory and ancestral heritage. These universal democratic dividends give humanity a common origin, a common destiny, with peculiarities that allow the assumption of different trajectories only to arrive at the same destination at different times of enlarged liberty and unbridled prosperity. Hence, it is as clear as noonday that human beings are owners of liberty, dignity, and prosperity. They would not relent or rest until such values are embodied in our government structures. We are assembled here to exchange views on how legislative maturity, integrity, and capacity could be employed to carve our own path towards that shared destiny of liberty and prosperity. Focusing on the demand of the day, my task is to elucidate on the theme, the role of the National Assembly in policy, governance, and development processes. First and foremost, allow me to assert that policy must be instrumentalized and operationalized. The role of the National Assembly encapsulates both domains. Development is inconceivable without policy making and policy execution. The law, as provided by statute or international agreement, crowns policy with the legal framework for legitimacy. Needless to say, finance is the lifeblood for policy execution. Both the legal framework for giving policy a legal foundation and a legitimate one, and the finance must rely on the National Assembly as the first port of call. It is important to point out that the policy-making arm of the state is the government. In this regard, clarification is required to dismiss the age-old notion that the National Assembly is an arm of government. Section 230 of the Constitution states without any ambiguity that government means the executive government of the Gambia. The National Assembly is not an arm of the government. It is a separate arm of the state. In the eyes of the supreme law of the Republic, neither the National Assembly nor the people are part of the composition of government. The government is the executive arm of the state. Section 76 of the Constitution vests executive power in the president. The executive is the policy-making and policy execution arm of the state. However, there are regulatory and control mechanisms which makes it impossible to formulate and implement policies without consultation and authorization from other arms of the state like the National Assembly. Under our constitutional framework, the business of the executive and that of the National Assembly are inseparable. They are irretrievably linked. The executive has powers under Section 80 of the Constitution to create public offices, and under Section 71 to create ministries. These offices and ministries serve as instruments for policy making and implementation. Section 77 and 101 of the Constitution create the route which the president and ministers could take to access the assembly to conduct business of governance and development. Section 74, 77, and 109 of the Constitution makes the whole cabinet accountable to the National Assembly. Members of cabinet could be summoned to attend the meetings of the National Assembly to address matters of national concern. The executive has to bring bills to the National Assembly in order to develop any legal framework for the establishment of an office or the execution of a policy that requires financial backing. Section 79 restricts the executive to negotiating international agreement, but makes its ratification by the National Assembly mandatory before concluding any such agreement to put it into effect. The constitutional benchmarks are clear. It is now relevant to outline the various functions of the National Assembly, especially when it comes to policy and governance, and gauge with sobriety and objectivity how the acceptable standards have been instrumentalized in our standing orders or operationalized in our practice. It would not elude our recollection that many bills were laid before the National Assembly for debate, consideration, and enactment. The first leg of enacting a bill is passing it after the consideration stage. Effective governance requires that the members of the executive who bring business to the National Assembly to be well groomed in parliamentary procedures. Many people were unaware that bills may be introduced in the National Assembly to two different procedures. The speedy procedure is to introduce it through a certificate of urgency, which obliges members to work non-stop until the bill is disposed of once they support the motion. On the other hand, the normal life of a bill from the first reading to consideration cannot be speedy. A bill moved under a certificate of urgency does not go through the thorough scrutiny that a normal bill goes through. According to our standing orders, a normal bill must be remitted to the relevant committee or joint committee of the National Assembly for review, clause by clause, with competent witnesses in attendance who could rely on their experience and professional capacity to provide relevant amendments to the provisions. The time taken to process the bill improves the quality of its content. In fact, there is a common saying that ignorance of the law is no excuse. The National Assembly has taken the bold step to bridge the gap between lawmaker and lawkeeper by introducing public hearing on the bills before they are enacted into law in many cases. This involvement of the people in lawmaking process would ultimately eradicate ignorance of the law and enhance ownership by and compliance with the law by lawkeepers. The pioneering role of the National Assembly in promoting transparency by subjecting activity reports and financial statements of public bodies to review is having a dramatic turnaround effect on attitudes regarding public sector management. Public institutions we used to take loans from each other and crowd out development are now signing agreements to repay those loans and prevent recurrence. Those directors who used to obey executive orders and spend lavishly on matters outside the statutory objectives of their sectors are now exposing the harm done and are making pledges to prevent any recurrence. The aftermath of parliamentary scrutiny will have positive impact on development. The 2022 recurrent and development budget allocations, which preceded this day, the review process, which was adopted prior to the consideration of the annual estimates, the enthusiasm and trust manifested by ministers in the capacity of the National Assembly members to better understand the existential threat that the university and college face due to debt trap speak volumes on the relevance of the Assembly to policy making, governance, and national development. Such contributions in prioritizing education, health, agriculture, security, youth, and women development, in making budgetary allocations, despite the limitation of available resources, are too evident to the naked eye to be swept under the carpet. One would not do justice to the topic without flagging the ethos of sovereign ownership of the development process, which had been propagated by all those National Assembly members who are committed to the principle of self-reliance in development. The venture towards sovereign development financing is demonstrated by the $10 million approved by the Assembly for allocation to higher education to complete the UTG dental and surgery building. The approval given for the additional funding of the $265.5 million Hakalang Road in Nyomi, $240 million Kaleng Bush Town Road, $210 million Kiang West Road, $60 million Bassam Market, $210 million Kir Oldie, Chairman, Nyangabanta Road, and the $260 million Sabasanja Road Network, to name but a few. Development is therefore inconceivable without partnership with the National Assembly surpassing partisan consideration. An objective assessment of performance would reveal a balance sheet showing that the National Assembly of the 2016 to 2022 legislative years, called the fifth legislature, is more an asset to the nation than a liability. Bills and policies have been scrutinized and tempered to be fit for purpose. Misrepresentation has been restrained through closer monitoring of public institutions and projects, and development has been fostered through prioritization of budgetary allocations from deficit and domestic debt fueling expenditures to areas that could enhance the quality of essential social services delivery and facilitate the expansion of both infrastructure and the productive base of the economy, especially agriculture. Security has also not been honored with this regard. Honorable Speaker, distinguished clerk, distinguished invitees, I cannot conclude without emphasizing that the instruments we have prepared have created the enabling environment for the National Assembly to engage in a constructive debate with the executive and initiate a constructive conversation with the Gambian people to bring representation down to their doorsteps. The right given to ministers under Standing Order 47, the right given to members to give personal explanation or make a statement on a matter of the day as provided for by Standing Order 50 and 51, respectively, have made it possible for National Assembly members to be in touch with the daily realities of the people. Let me close this chapter by reminding ourselves that there are many unfinished businesses that the nation holds dear. It should have been our honor and glory to be among the principal architects of the final crafting and promulgation of the Constitution of the Third Republic through a robust parliamentary scrutiny of any draft produced by a commission constituted by a law we pass for enactment. It will also be important for foresight by recalling that many outstanding issues such as civil service reform, security sector reform, final disposal of the recommendation of the TRC would all have parliamentary dimensions that should be prepared for to prevent miscarriages in legislative processes to the detriment of good governance and national development. Allow me to mention a case in point. According to Section 69, subsection 3 of the Constitution, after a president, quote, after a president has vacated the office of president, no court may entertain any action against him or her in any civil proceedings in respect of any act done in his or her official capacity as president. A criminal court, a criminal court shall only have jurisdiction to entertain proceedings against him or her in respect of any acts or omissions alleged to have been perpetrated by him or her while holding office as president if the National Assembly has resolved on a motion supported by not less than 2/3 of all members that such proceedings are justified in the public interest. We must prepare the National Assembly for its task. There is currently a controversy regarding diaspora voting. The law says no qualified Gambian voter should be excluded from being registered as a voter. Lawmakers are duty-bound to ensure that lawmaking does not contradict the letter and spirit of the Constitution. Hence, it requires creating a law without any ambiguity or absurdity. This is the task of the lawmaker, to make law that should not deprive a person the exercise of right, which others are not denied. That would be discriminating. In order for all citizens to be equal in determining representation, the National Assembly must enact an electoral act which is free from ambiguity and absurdity. This is how the National Assembly could contribute to inclusive, participatory, and democratic governance. It is also significant, Clark, that we bear in mind Standing Order 82 to 84, which talks about a draft budget. Do we need it? If we need it, how do we prepare the National Assembly members for that task? In short, Clark, National Assembly members, this is an interface between the past and the future. We must utilize hindsight to rely on foresight in order to prepare for a future that is fit for purpose. So in that light, this National Assembly service, which is the bridge between the past and the future, must be capacitized, given all its wherewithal, so that it can facilitate the capacity building of its staff and the capacity building of new National Assembly members, so that the delivery of services to the people to eradicate their poverty, enhance their liberty and prosperity would be ensured. Thank you very much for listening to me.
I think no. I think it is now extremely clear what our rules as the National Assembly is concerned, and he has provided the clear distinction between what the National Assembly is for and what the National Assembly service is for. We will have times for questions. I'm sure most of us want to ask questions. But before I give the floor to ask questions, I want you to also be aware that in addition to the Honorable Speaker's office, the National Assembly has two important offices. We call them the offices of the National Assembly leaders. In our situation, we are fortunate to have two leaders. One is the leader for the minority, and the other is the leader for the majority party. It therefore gives me great pleasure to invite the leader of the minority party, who is also a member of the National Assembly Governing Authority, to share with you. Honorable, please.
Very much, MC. Retired Honorable Member for Serekunda and the guest speaker, Honorable Majority Leader who is representing the Speaker, National Assembly members, the Clerk of the House, and the staff, all permanent secretaries present, Director NCAC, Westminster Foundation for Democracy representative to the Gambia, distinguished guests and development partners, vulnerable religious leaders, members of the civil society and the media, students, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, all order protocol respectfully observed. Good morning to you all. It is with delight that I stand here today to share a brief responsibility of the unique role and function of the minority leader in Parliament. The minority leader of the National Assembly is an elected member of Parliament and functions as the leader of the second largest party or coalition of parties in the National Assembly. Though not a pronounced position in the Constitution, it is recognized by the Standing Orders of Parliament, Standing Order 23, and Parliamentary Convention as a leader of Parliament. The minority leader occupies a number of important institutional and party roles and responsibilities. And his or her fundamental goal to recapture majority control of the assembly. From a party perspective, the minority leader has a wide range of assignments, all geared toward retaking or winning majority control or support of the assembly. Few of these underlying principles direct the work of the minority leader. First of all, the minority leader provides campaign assistance to party incumbents and again challengers. Secondly, the minority leader devises strategies in consultation with the like-minded colleagues to advance party objectives. Thirdly, the minority leader works to promote and publicize his or her party or group of party agenda. Finally, from party perspective, the minority leader, if his or her party controls the presidency, confer regularly with the head of state about issues before the assembly, i.e., the assembly's agenda and political event generally. The minority leader also strives to promote party harmony so as to maximize the chance for legislative and political success. From an institutional perspective, the minority leader ensures that he or she champions the cause of the minority group in the parliament. The minority leader also has other institutional duties, such as developing the minority position, negotiate with the majority parties, direct minority caucus activities on the floor, and also direct activity for the minority parties or parties. Just like the majority leader, Standing Order 86 requires that the minority leader is consulted in the transactions of important business in the assembly, such as the allocation of adequate period for the debate on the motion and consideration of the annual estimate by the Committee of Supply. Similarly, in accordance with Standing Order 101-1, the minority leader has the responsibility to nominate membership to the committees of selection after each general election. This is the first committee to constitute after each parliamentary election, and it is the responsibility of the minority leader, majority and minority leaders to nominate members to it. Finally, the minority leader also lead the floor debate for the minority party, hence their leadership is a key ingredient to a more balanced and successful legislature. In conclusion, it is worth noting that the position of the minority leader is a key in any parliamentary democracy like ours, and he or she serves as the leader of his or her party in parliament. I thank you.
Leader, Honorable Samba Jallo, who is in his second inning in the National Assembly. He has been serving the constituents of Nyamina Dankunku for the past 10 solid years. Put a round of applause for him. And just to add, with the permission of the Right Honorable Minority Leader, in the 5th legislature, the Minority Caucus comprises the APRC, that's the Alliance for Patriotics, Reorientation and Construction. It also comprises the NRP, the National Reconciliation Party. It comprises the GDC, the Gambia Democratic Congress. It comprises also the PPP, Progressive People's Party, and it also comprises the People's Democratic Organization for Independence and Socialism. And it is honored to announce, to state that these 5 parties comprise the minority caucus of the 5th legislature of the Republic of the Gambia. Once you talk about one parliamentary leader, you have to talk about the other. Those of you conversant with National Assembly proceedings, you will often hear the speaker say, on behalf of both sides of the National Assembly. So Parliament requires that actions, decisions, processes take into account all sides of the legislature. So we have heard from the minority side. It is therefore obvious that we will hear from the majority. And our Honorable Majority Leader is also a member of the National Assembly Governing Authority. He is no other person than Honorable Keba KK Barrow, alias KKB. Honorable Sir.
Mr. Moderator, good afternoon. On behalf of the Honorable Speaker, I want to welcome all our invited guests to this maiden meeting of the National Assembly. Your Excellency, representatives of the British High Commissioner, Right Honorable Member for Serekunda as guest speaker, honorable members of the National Assembly, the clerk and staff of the National Assembly, all permanent secretaries present or represented here, the Director General of the National Council for Arts and Culture, Westminster Foundation country representative to the Gambia, distinguished guests and development partners, vulnerable religious leaders, members of the civil society and media here in present, students, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, all other protocols respectively and duly observed. Good afternoon to you all. It is with this great pride again that I stand here today to share a brief responsibility of the unique role and functions of the majority leader in the National Assembly. The majority leader is the contemporary National Assembly of the Gambia, is elected and serves as the leader of the largest political party represented at the Assembly. Though not a pronounced position in the National Constitution, it is an established position under Standing Orders 23 of the Standing Orders of the National Assembly. Equally by Parliamentary Convention, it is a well-recognized leadership position within and outside the Parliament. Unlike the Speaker, as per our present standing orders, both the majority and minority leaders are not elected by the full Assembly, but are instead elected by their representative parties or coalition of parties, and their selection and election merely announced to the Assembly by the Speaker. The majority leader is the chief spokesperson for his or her party in the legislature and also serves as head of majority caucus in the National Assembly. Typically, the majority leader can function as the Speaker's lieutenant or field commander in the absence of the Deputy Speaker for the management of the floor. Although the majority leader's duties are not especially defined, but it has evolved to the point where it is possible to spotlight two fundamental, often interlocking responsibilities that orient the majority leader's work, which is institutional and party. From an institutional perspective at the National Assembly, the majority leader has a number of duties. One, scheduling businesses at the plenary is part of the important responsibilities, and the majority leader collectively participates in these activities of the National Assembly Business Committee, known as ABC. In other parliaments, the majority leader chairs the Business Committee in shaping the chambers of the overall agenda and in determining when, whether, how, or in what order business are proceeded. In addition to the majority leader's role, it's actively in instructing winning coalition for the party's legislative priorities, defending and explaining his or her party's program and agenda, and serves as an ambassador to the executive, especially when the head of state is of the same party. Importantly, to Standing Orders 86 requires that the majority leader is consulted in the transaction of important businesses in the Assembly, such as the allocation of adequate period for the debate on the motion and consideration of the annual estimates by the Committee of Supply. Similarly, in accordance with Standing Order 111 of the majority leader has the responsibility to nominate membership to the Committee of Selection after each general election. This is the first committee to be constituted after each parliamentary elections, and it is the responsibility of the majority and minority leaders to nominate members to it. From a political party perspective, three key activities brace up the majority leader's practical goal of trying to ensure that the party remains in control of the Assembly. First of all, the majority leader assists the election campaigns of party incumbents by, for example, raising campaign funds and traveling to scores of constituencies to campaign either with incumbents or against challenges of the party. Secondly, the majority leader promotes the party's agenda by developing teams and issues important core supporters to the electorate. Third, the majority leader encourages party cohesion For instance, working to minimize internal fraction disagreement that may undermine the majority party's ability to govern the assembly. Finally, it is the duty of the majority leader to consult with members to gauge party sentiment and generally work to advance the goals of the majority party by deciding what legislations their parties should support. In conclusion, it is worth noting that the position of majority leader is key in any parliamentary democracy like ours, and he or she serves as the leader of his or her party in parliament. On that note, I want to take this opportunity to thank all of you for your presence and your attention. Thank you.
Since we started, and I think it is time to open the dialogue. Before you have distinguished or honorable members of the National Assembly of the Republic of the Gambia. You also have members of the National Assembly Governing Authority. So we are privileged that the honorable majority. Vaccine.